Hi everyone, and welcome to Efficient Gaming. I'm sorry that getting this video out was a little bit slower than intended. I had hoped to get it out somewhere near launch, or at the very least over the weekend, but I was actually attending and involved in an Indian wedding for two of my good friends. Shout out to both Amit and Geeta, congrats! So today we're going to be running through some top tips for new witches. So for anyone who's new to the game, I'm just going to be running through the things that I think will help you most as a beginner. So let's get started. Now the first thing is combat. Combat is more than 90% of your actual gameplay experience. Everything is around combat. Nemetons, general monster battles, even the potions and armor and everything you buy is so that you can be better at combat. Now there are a lot of things that make combat easier, but the most important thing is practice. So the best way to do that is actually to go out and play and defeat monsters and learn their timings, but there are a few little things that you can do that will make it just that little bit easier. Now, like I said, the first one is practice. Now, if you're at home and you don't have time to go out and play Witcher, and you do still want to do practice, very occasionally monsters will spawn at home for you, but in the absence of monsters, you've got the training dummy. So you can go in, you just hit the main menu button at the bottom and click on practice, and it takes you through the tutorial that you were offered at the beginning of the game as part of the first quest. Now you can do this anytime. This will explain to you the basics of doing fast attacks and strong attacks, and that's basically based on the speed at which you either tap your finger on the screen or swipe your finger across the screen. It'll run you through how and when to do critical hits. It doesn't fully explain how critical hits work with monster weaknesses, but I will run through that. But it gives you experience of using those different types of attacks. It will also run you through how to parry. You can practice your perfect parrying. This is actually a really good place to practice perfect parrying and timing because you don't actually take damage in the tutorial, so you can do it literally forever, or until you decide that you're bored and want to defeat it. It also runs through the use of bombs and how to cast signs, all on a dummy, which isn't really attacking you, but it runs through how to do each of those things. So that is a really invaluable practice tool which you can get to at any point, regardless of whether there's a monster around you or not. Now, while the game will teach you how to do each of these attacks, I'm going to run through it very quickly now with you. If you want to perform a fast attack, you swipe your finger or thumb or whatever you decide to use to play the game with. You can use a stylus if you want. You use your input device to swipe across the screen quickly for a fast attack. If you want to do a strong attack, you've got to swipe less frequently. It's not that you have to swipe slower, although that will achieve the same effect if you do it with the right timing. You can swipe your finger across the screen quickly, but you need to leave it a small period of time before you do that again. You'll be able to tell whether you're doing a strong attack because the damage on the monster will be roughly double that of a fast attack. It doesn't matter whether it's weak or strong to strong attacks or fast attacks. They are what charges the critical hit meter, which we'll get onto now. So when you first start to fight a monster, you will find that it literally, as you encounter it and click on it on the map, it tells you everything that that monster is weak to. Now, this monster here, I believe, is weak to both strong attacks and a steel sword. So if you use a steel sword, you will be doing more damage. Now, you could use a steel sword and you could do fast attacks and the entire time, and you could defeat that monster, but you will never get a critical hit if you're only doing fast attacks. So critical hits come from doing the type or speed of hit that that monster is weak to. So if you go in and fight a monster that's weak to strong attacks and you use fast attacks, you'll never get a critical hit in. You need to use those strong attacks, and when you use the strong attacks, you will find that that's when your yellow bar above the monster's health, or your critical hit bar, that's when that will increase. Once you fill that up completely, it starts the next mini interaction, which is the critical hit. Just like the tutorial says, you want to hit that, either tap or swipe on the screen when the circle is aligned with the other circle. So you've got a stationary circle in the center of the screen and a moving critical hit circle that comes across it. Now, It's best to hit it when it's in the center of the circle, but if you miss it and it goes past it, don't not hit the screen, because you can completely lose a critical hit if it goes off the screen, but you will still get a critical hit, just not a perfect critical hit, if you tap or swipe on the screen at any point that the critical hit is on the screen. So some very rough multipliers here. A normal critical hit, not made inside the circle, will do roughly twice your strong attack against that monster, and a perfect critical hit in the center of the circle will do roughly 3 times the amount of damage of your strong attack. So even if you miss the circle, don't just let it go off the screen. Make sure you hit or tap the screen anyway, because you are still going to get a critical hit that does twice as much damage. If you need to block, it's literally just holding your finger down on the screen. Now, you don't have to hold it down for too long. The longer you hold down the button, the closer the sword moves into the parry position. To get a perfect parry, you need to parry just before the monster hits you. I will give some examples of this now on screen while I'm talking, either with the dummy or with monsters. But a perfect parry, you're going to need to practice timing for. Each monster is different in its attack animation, and each monster has more than one attack animation. So over the course of your gameplay, you'll need to pay attention to its attack animation and learn roughly when it hits you. You'll get feedback, because obviously you take damage, whether you're blocking or not. So you'll need to learn to time that. Now, the little red indicator that comes up on the top of the screen that tells you that a monster is about to attack you, that comes up on hugely variable times, because each monster again has a different attack animation. They can last anywhere from half a second or less before the monster's going to attack you, all the way up to about 2 to 3 seconds, because some of the vampires' attack animations, I think very specifically it is an Alp, it will sort of take a couple of steps backwards, it'll run up to you on the screen, and then it will attack you. So even though the red dot above the monster gives you, or a red warning sign above the monster gives you an idea of when it's going to attack, or when it's doing its attack animation, this doesn't necessarily help with the timing for perfect parry, because the attack animations are very variable. What it does help with is interrupting the attack animation. If you interrupt a monster while it's doing an attack animation, and this can be done through a perfect critical hit, a sign cast, or a bomb throw, if you do any of those 3 things while it's performing its attack animation, that attack animation will cancel, the monster will reset, and it'll be a short period of time before it starts that attack animation again. Now, if you've got something else ready, whether that be a sign, a critical hit, or another bomb, you can use that to interrupt the attack animation again, therefore delaying your damage taking until after. Obviously, once you've run out of things that you can do to interrupt the attack animation, you will have to either parry or use a spell that parries for you, in the example of Quen, and this is the strategy that will allow you to defeat the tougher monsters. Anyone can go into a monster and just swipe their finger on the screen, and once you're a high enough level, that's pretty much all you have to do to defeat the lower level monsters anyway. But it's the attack timings, it's the interruption of the attack animations that's going to be able to get you to take such a small amount of damage over the course of the battle that you will be able to defeat the harder monsters. Now again, back to the first screen when you encounter a monster, it also tells you what other types of attacks that this monster is weak to. So in the beginning you start with a steel sword, so you're going to be most effective against monsters that are weak to steel. Now that's not to say that you can't kill monsters that are weak to silver, because they're the 2 types of general weaponry that we have. You definitely can. And it was a very long time, I think I was about level 20 before I got my first silver sword, because I was saving up for an armor that I was much more interested in getting than a silver sword. And I did quite well. I was able to even kill 1 skull monsters that were weak to silver around about the time I got to about level 20 with my basic steel sword. So it is possible, it just takes good practice, good gameplay, some perfect critical hits, some perfect defenses, and plenty of patience. Sometimes I would fight monsters that were 1 skull 2 or 3 times before I would defeat them, but it could be worth it if there's no other monsters around for you. However, Obviously, if you do own both a silver sword and a steel sword, whether you've purchased it early on, whether you've been super, super, super lucky and got it out of your weekly reward, or whether you've earned enough coins to purchase one from the shop, if you've got a silver sword and a steel sword, you can interchange between them. And that is going to give you another big damage boost to defeating that monster. Using the right type doesn't charge the crit meter any faster, but it does deal more damage per hit. Now again, the third thing that it shows you is anything else that the monster's weak to. Now not all monsters are weak to different things. Some of them are only weak to one type of thing, and that could either be steel, silver. Those who are only weak to steel or silver won't take any extra damage, they'll just take normal damage from signs. But you will find some monsters that are weak to either fire or kinetic damage. So if a monster is weak to fire damage, it will take extra damage from your Igni spell. If a monster is weak to kinetic damage, it will take extra damage from your Ard spell. So this is something else to consider when fighting a monster, which spell you're going to use against it, as well as which sword. And you can prepare this in the battle screen. If you want to change your sword, as soon as you've clicked on the monster, you can look at what the monster's weak to. It'll tell you whether it's weak to steel or silver. You can click on the sword on the left, and that will bring up a list of all the swords that you've got, and you can scroll up and down the list and click on the appropriate sword for that monster type. When you're first starting out, it's very unlikely that you will be getting the time bonus when defeating monsters. But once you level up a bit more and have a bit more damage, the easier monsters, it's always worth trying to kill them as quickly as possible. Obviously, it's not worth using resources, in my opinion, to do that, so don't be going to use bombs on easy monsters just to get 20 extra experience. But if you do manage to have a good fight and defeat the monster quite quickly, then you will get 20 extra experience points as well, so that's always worth trying. If you are fighting a more difficult monster, then I would say that your focus should be on staying alive, making good attack interruptions, as well as making very good defensive parries or timing your spells right so that you take less damage if you're using Quen. With playstyles like this and good practice and getting lots of perfects, you will be able to defeat higher level monsters, but obviously this is quite difficult. Now, having played on two different phones now, both of which are my phone, one of which only sort of became available just before the global release of the game. I've got a gaming phone, which is a Razer phone, and I've got my general personal / work phone, which is a Pixel 3a. Now the Pixel 3a plays the game fine generally, but as soon as I moved over to my Razer phone, I found that it was so much smoother, and I was able to get critical hits and critical defenses so much easier. So if you're stuck and you find that it's very hard to do critical hits, perfect critical hits, and perfect defenses, then the phone can have a huge effect on that, I've found. So if your friend's able to do them and you're not, it could be down to your phone. Obviously it's down to practice as well, because even with the lag on my phone, on my Pixel, I am able to get perfects most of the time, but sometimes I do notice that it is the lag that is stopping me from getting those perfects. So something to consider. If you've got a better phone to play on, definitely use that if it's supported, because the slower phones do have a more negative effect on the game. When you first start playing, early on, you're going to want to focus on all of the monsters on the map that you can fight. Now, you can, and there's no reason to not have a go at fighting the more difficult monsters. You'll be able to tell how difficult a monster is, roughly, by how many skulls are over its head. If there are no skulls over the monster's head, it is a relatively easy monster, and it should be something that you can kill as soon as you've started playing the game, whether it is weak to silver or whether it is weak to steel with your standard Witcher sword. Obviously, the silver sword's going to help you defeat those easier and quicker, but you should still be able to defeat them with the steel sword and enough practice. So ideally, you want to start out killing the no-skull monsters. However, it's always good experience to have a go at killing a 1-skull, 2-skull, or 3-skull monster, just so you can see what you're going to have to fight later on in the game. Encountering a monster and fighting it and losing doesn't cost you anything if you haven't used any potions, bombs, or witcher oils. So as long as you don't put anything in, you can go and fight that monster until it despawns, having a good practice, having a good go, and seeing how far you can get that down before you die. It's all good game experience. Obviously, the difficulty of the monsters goes up, so you've got 0 skull, you've got 1 skull, and you've got 2 skull and 3 skull. This roughly tells you the difficulty of the monster. I've come across 2 skull monsters that are legendary, as well as 3 skull monsters that are legendary. I've also come across 2 skull monsters that are common. So throughout the game, you'll come across different kinds of monsters that are of different difficulty and different rarity. And ideally, one of your jobs as a witcher is to fill in the bestiary. So eventually you're going to want to be able to kill all of those monsters. I've personally been so busy since the beginning of the game that I haven't actually started any of the new quests yet. I'm looking forward to doing that either one of the evenings this week or this coming weekend. But as of yet, I've not started any of them. So I don't have anything much to say on them, except for any quests that you can defeat early on will grant you extra experience and extra gold. However, some of the quests, from what I've read and looked at, do give you better rewards depending on how well you do in the quest and depending on the decisions you make in the quest. So some quests it might be worth holding off on until you're a bit stronger. So if there's, again, I'm not sure because I haven't looked extensively into it. If there's a quest that says go out and defeat a bunch of monsters, it will be a lot easier for you to do that once you're a higher level. So don't stress if there's quests that you can't complete yet. You will get there and you will be able to defeat them eventually. This game, more than any of the other games that I've played that are AR, mobile style, location-based game, is quite difficult and it has a bit of a learning curve in it. Now, this is, again, one of my favorites because of the RPG aspect to it. You get to make your own decisions in quests. You get to build your character the way you want to. Before the most recent patch, it was quite easy to get enough skill points to feel overpowered in the game. But I think the quality of life patch that they made to that and made it more difficult to get the skill points has really helped to increase the longevity of the game. The next thing I want to talk about is gold and how to get gold. So when you're first starting out, you'll be a low level, you won't be able to defeat that many monsters, especially the skulled monsters, and you'll just be walking around grinding and getting as much stuff as you can. It's worth creating any type of potion that you can get ingredients for and using that on some of the higher skull monsters to try and beat them. Potions are quite easy to come by. All the ingredients are quite easy to come by, so don't worry if you use one and you aren't able to defeat the monster. Just remember that for next time and maybe don't bother until you're a bit more powerful. So the best ways to get gold early on are doing your daily tasks. Now, if you're given a daily task and you think it's something that you're not going to be able to complete during the day, either leave it for the next day, or there's actually a button on the quest itself in the top right hand corner which looks like a little 2 arrows going in the opposite direction. It's a little bit like a recycling sign. If you click on that, it asks you if you want to change this contract. If you click change, it will randomly give you another daily quest, which may be more achievable, might be easier for you to do. So occasionally I've got ones like defeat a noon wraith. Now they only appear around lunchtime, so if I don't think I'm going to be playing the game around lunchtime on that day, it might be something that I leave for another day, or it might be something that I swap out and try and re-roll a different quest that might be a bit easier for me to complete that day. Now, I would also say, if you can't complete a quest on a day, don't worry too much. There are 3 daily quest slots for you, and over the course of the several months that I've been playing, yes, several, it's been about 3 months, there has been at least 2 days where I didn't complete a daily quest. Now, overall, that has actually made the quests easier for me to complete every day, because it basically gives me 3 days to do any given quest. Usually over those 3 days I will get that quest done if it's somewhat achievable, and even if not, then the next 2 quests that I get on the next day, as long as I've completed any one of them by the end of the day, I can claim that for that one day and fill in my 7-day streak to get my larger weekly reward box. So I personally feel that it is beneficial in the long run that if you have missed a day or 2 days as long as you've got the quest for that day, it makes the quests, the daily quests, easier to do. So I only ever claim 1 quest per day because I like to have them filled out, and it gives me the chance to not play as much on one day and still be able to get the maximum amount of coins. So that's the first way of getting coins, daily tasks. The second way of getting coins is once you are level 10 or above, you can go and start to fight at the tree, or the dark red and black looking trees that are on the map. They're called Nemeton. I've got another video where I cover Nemeton battles, although that's probably due an update since that has been changed recently as well. But feel free to click on the link above and have a look at that if that interests you. So once you're a level 10, you can go out and you can battle in Nemetons. If you manage to defeat a Nemeton, you will get 50 gold for that, but only for the first 3 that you defeat during each day. So you can earn up to 150 gold per day just from Nemetons. The aforementioned daily tasks give you anywhere between 50 and 80 gold. And the third way to earn gold is to complete the in-game quests, which we spoke briefly about before. You'll find quests automatically. You might have to search for a quest, but if you're doing a quest, there are potential gold rewards from those. So it's something else to focus on early if there's something in particular you want to buy, like a silver sword or a piece of armor or a bag upgrade to make your life a little bit easier. Okay, let's next talk about leveling up. So I've got a whole video dedicated to the skill tree and where I feel it is very important to spend skills or to spend skill points, and where it's less important to spend skill points depending on which build that you're going for. But that doesn't really cover how to level up and where we get skill points from. So there are 2 ways to get skill points. The first is to level your character up. So this is very easy. You walk around the map, you defeat monsters, you defeat Nemetons, and you're rewarded with XP. Obviously that XP directly relates into your character screen and fills up your XP bar. When you get to the next level, you get 5 skill points to spend in the skill trees. Again, I'm not going to go very specifically into what to spend those skill points on because that will be covered in my other video, which I will provide a link to above. But leveling up does give you skill points. The second way to earn skill points is by defeating a certain number of each type of monster. So each time you defeat a certain number of monsters, you will be awarded with a skill point. For common monsters, you need to defeat 3 before you get your first skill point, 50 before you get your second skill point, and 150 of that type of monster before you're awarded the third skill point. Now, at 150, you've considered to have maxed out that monster. You can still defeat them on the map for XP, but you won't be able to earn any more skill points from that monster. For rare monsters, you need to kill 2 for your first skill point, 10 for your second skill point, and 30 for your third skill point. When you encounter legendary monsters, when you're able to defeat them, you only need to kill 1 to get your first skill point. You need to kill 2 further ones to get your second skill point. And in the third tier, you will need to kill 6 to get your next skill point. Each time you've completed a tier, it resets back to 0. So cumulatively, out of the first monster type that you will need, if you want all 3 skill points for a common monster, you will need to defeat 203, which is your 3 plus 50 plus 150. For a legendary monster, you will need to defeat 1 plus 2 plus 6, which is 9 legendary monsters to get all 3 skill points from those. The last thing that I wanted to mention when leveling up is XP scrolls. Now, because your character is, for want of better words, so weak in the beginning compared to how strong you're going to be once you've leveled up and defeated some monsters, the absolute best time to use an XP scroll is as you're going out for your first walk as a Witcher. Like, literally never played the game before, and that's for 2 reasons. So the first reason is every time you level up, you get skill points which you can spend to make your character stronger. Obviously, earlier levels are much easier to obtain than the later levels, and by using an XP scroll you'll get there much quicker, which means you'll be able to defeat the harder monsters quicker, and then overall you'll be earning more XP in a shorter period of time. The second reason is every single monster that you defeat for the first time, every different one, will give you bonus XP the first time you defeat it. Now, if it's your first walkout ever, and you've put an XP scroll on, you're going to level up so much faster, and you're going to be making use of all that bonus XP, which you will literally never get again. So I never like to say you should rush something, but the quicker that you can get to level 10 and start battling Nemetons with some skill points behind you, the better, because that expands your ability to earn gold per day and is going to make it much more fun when you can start saving up towards purchasing some of those premium items that makes your battling experience easier. So early on, if you're ever considering buying any XP scrolls to play throughout the day, definitely consider buying one straight away, or as early as you possibly can, because obviously when you go out you're not going to encounter every single type of monster the first time you go out. You might only encounter a few of them, 5% maybe if you're lucky. But the earlier levels are going to be when it is most efficient to use the XP scrolls. That's where you're going to get the most benefit out of it, the most bang for your buck, and level up quicker to get those skill points that you need to become a stronger Witcher. The next best time to use an XP scroll is going to be when the weather changes and you don't recognize many of the monsters outside. So if it's raining on a particular day, that will attract different monsters. If it's particularly windy on a particular day, that will attract different monsters. And because those are all monsters that you've not defeated before, that's the next best time to pop an XP scroll and go out for at least a half an hour monster hunt. Now, I think I've mentioned a few times in general, in comments or in other videos, generally what equipment I've purchased first and what equipment I've continued to use going forward. But I just want to give you an idea again now, roughly, of what equipment you should be looking for. And this is going to heavily depend on what kind of build that you want to go for, because certain equipment works better with certain builds. Now, personally, I use the Quen spell a lot because I find its defensive capabilities allow me to last longer in a fight and to defeat the harder monsters a bit easier. It gives me a lot of defense and utility in not having to perfect parry every single time. So my playstyle is built around using the Quen spell, so that's defensive. So the swords that I've purchased for both silver and steel are the Manticore swords. Those swords give you cooldown reduction, which means you're able to cast your signs a lot more often. 30% cooldown reduction. It's quite significant. It makes a big difference when you're battling monsters. I find that that means very often I can chain perfect critical hits as well as my Quen spell cast, so that it's not very often during a battle that I will actually have to make a perfect defense. And the Quen spell reflects damage as well as absorbs damage, so that you take less damage and deal more damage. My first armor purchase was the Manticore armor. Now, that was the best for me at the time based on the state of the game. I don't think that is currently the best purchase of armor for most people at the moment. So the Manticore armor gives you a extra potion every time you battle a monster that any other potions that you use will be the effect of those will be increased by 100%. Now, in saying that, this piece of armor is completely useless unless you have more than one potion slot, because the potion that it gives you takes up one potion slot. Now, I wish I'd known that when I purchased it, but it was at a time when I'd unlocked 2 potion slots anyway, so I was still able to utilize it, but not as much as I thought I would be able to utilize it. It's still a really great piece of armor, and I always use that when I'm battling legendaries, and I use it with the Swift Potion, which gives me 100% extra HP rather than 50% extra HP. I usually pair this with an appropriate sword and the type of oil that the monster is weak to. But just for legendaries, I find that at my current level, I'm quite easily able to kill most 2-skull monsters without any potions, oils, or bombs. So again, this is playstyle based. If you're going for the Quen spell use, the best armor that I would recommend for your build would be the Feline armor, because this reduces damage from unparried hits by 15%. So every time you use Quen, that's an unparried hit that you're taking. Quen is absorbing most of the damage, but you are still taking damage as it's an unparried hit. And I've tried, and while Quen is active, you can't parry. It always takes the hit for you, even if you've got a parry on at the correct time. So my personal suggestion, if you are building the Quen route, would be the Feline armor. Now, the alternate route is if you are building and putting skill points into the Ard spell. So Ard spell actually gives you an attack interrupt as part of the spell. So not only can you interrupt attacks when fighting from getting perfect critical hits, but you can also cast that Ard spell at the right time, and that will interrupt the attack. The largest benefit of the Ard spell is that it also makes the monster take 1 extra second before it's going to attack you again. This further reduces the damage that you're going to take because that monster is attacking you even less often. So the best thing, in my opinion, to pair this with, and this is what most people buy as their swords, Woven Swords. So the Woven Swords accelerate the critical hit meter charge. So the yellow bar up the top that you get from using the right type of attack on a monster will go, from the looks of it, 10% faster using these Woven Swords. Now, what I've heard is that most people use these in their battles, so it's the best all-rounder sword if you are building the Ard skill tree. So this just means that you're going to get to your critical hits quicker, which means you can do more critical hits, interrupt more attacks, and survive longer. So that is the Woven Steel Sword and the Woven Silver Sword, both of those. As an armor choice for your Ard build, I would consider going with the Griffin armor. So because the Ard build is all about dealing extra damage and parrying when you can't deal the damage, the Griffin armor gives you 10% damage reflection every time you parry. So because you're parrying more often in the Ard build than in the Quen build, if you've got the Griffin armor, that's going to reflect extra damage back at that opponent. That will help you to defeat that monster quicker because you're always going to be parrying quite often during a Ard build, because even though you're interrupting those attacks, there's nothing to absorb the damage for you like in the Quen build. So you're going to be parrying, so you should be using something that benefits when you're parrying. Aside from those recommendations, there are in each tier an experience, either sword or armor. If you're someone who's more focused on leveling up your character than anything else, then that's probably what you should go for. It will mean that the battles are going to be slightly more difficult because you haven't got any extra benefits from your sword or armor assisting you with the battle, but you should still be able to complete it, and it's going to give you a lot more experience overall utilizing those experience items. So for the armor, that is the Kea Morhen armor. I hope I am saying that right. As well as the Abaeth Silver Sword. There is currently no option for a steel sword that gives experience bonus, unless you happen to log in within the first week and play the game within the first week of launch. Now, to do that, you've only got 1 day left because the game launched roughly a week ago. If you do log in before that time, you will be granted the Kea Morhen Steel Sword. So that pairs quite well with the Kea Morhen armor, and that one gives you 10% extra damage from killing monsters. The armor gives you, let's just double check, the armor gives you 25% extra damage from killing monsters, and the Abaeth Silver Sword gives you 25% extra damage from killing monsters. Now, all of these items are very gold intensive, so they're quite an expensive item. But if you feel like it's something that you want to do to support the game, and you just want that little bit easier leveling experience, then they are something else to consider. This experience will stack with the experience scroll as well. Okay, well that was long, but I do hope that it did help a lot of new players to find some general tips for making the game easier to play when you're quite new, which I imagine is where most people are at this stage of the game. So I do hope you all enjoyed the video. I'll be doing some deeper analysis of skill trees, what items to pair with them, depending on your build, and a lot more to come in the future. So if you've enjoyed the content, give us a like and subscribe to the channel to see more, and I'll catch you guys soon. Bye.